Okay. Warning in advance that the captions are imperfect at best, but they do a pretty good job overall. Okay, we are going to get started. I want you to know that we do have an accessible version of this presentation, which if you want to give us a private chat, we can share the accessible version of it with you. And just so you know, we're going to go through this presentation information. You are welcome to speak up or toss in a chat if you have a clarifying question. Otherwise, toss in the chat or save for the end. We plan to have plenty of time for questions and conversations. But just as you know, this is getting recorded, so we won't be able to have private kind of information shared, but we will be happy to talk about general things. Okay, we're going to get the show on the road here. Okay. So we wanted to start with just sort of an open letter to you from somebody who is deeply in our field. Her name is Jane Jarrow. She's been in our field for 35 years, but she also sent a student with a disability off to college. And she wrote to our community to kind of share her experience as a parent, and kind of wanted to open with this. So some of her quotes that she said from this letter is, "And now, as I prepare to pack her up and take her off to college in the fall, I recognize that this role has ended for me, and the word anxious doesn't even begin to describe my feelings. If you are worried that your child with a disability will have a difficult time making a successful transition to college without your involvement, then you're probably right to be worried. Very few children with disabilities can succeed at the college level. On the other hand, students with disabilities thrive on college campuses across the country. If you still think your son or daughter as your child and they still are comfortable accepting that role, we have to take a careful look at where you have come from and what lies before you. As parents, it is time for us to step back, allow, encourage, gently nudge our students with disabilities to assume significant independent responsibility for their own lives, both academically and personally. There is no doubt that I can explain those things more fully than my daughter can explain them or even understand them. It doesn't matter. Much as I hate it, I know that she has to be the one to convey all this crucial information, not me. While this may be your last chance to convey all that important information onto the college, it's your student with disabilities' first chance to convey that information, all by himself or herself. Don't spoil that opportunity and don't interfere." You can see the entire letter, which we'll pass along to you. Honestly, this is really what the point of this conversation is today. We really want to introduce our office to you, but we also want to help you begin thinking about how we pass that baton from sort of the parent advocate to the student as self-advocate.
I'm going to talk about a couple of different changes that happen during that transition. You know, we know that there are a lot of different changes that we're looking at moving forward, and you know, some of those changes can be scary and some of them can be difficult to process. So just kind of taking a look at the broader picture of some of the differences that we have between high school and college. And I would say the first three are ones that are really important to kind of dive into. So the first one there being the law. You know, in high school, students who have an IEP or individualized education plan are, really looked at under the Individuals with Disabilities Education Act, or IDEA. IDEA requires all public schools to make available to all children with disabilities a free and appropriate public education. And within IDEA, there are certain things that can be done that at the college level, we're really limited in our ability to be able to do moving forward. At the college level, we fall under the Americans with Disabilities Act as amended, as well as Section 504 of the Rehab Act. Both of those acts guarantee equal access rights to individuals with disabilities in the higher education setting, and also allow for accommodations. Accommodations can be made in order to provide an equal playing field to students with disabilities. However, as a major difference between the laws in college and the laws in high school, we are not able to modify curriculum or modify what's known as technical requirements in order to have a course or a major fit the student's individual needs. And I'll talk a little bit more about that on the next page. Another difference is between kind of teachers or, what we would call professors or faculty. Again, teachers may adjust or modify course materials and also standards for passing for students with disabilities at the high school level. However, here in the college level, professors will provide students with reasonable accommodations that are determined by our office. But students are expected to show mastery over the same material, the same course material, or major and minor requirements that all other students are expected to demonstrate. A third major point of difference would be in terms of advocacy. School districts at the high school level are responsible for evaluating students' learning and reporting disabilities to the students' teachers. At the college level, students must self-identify as having a disability in order to acquire and utilize their reasonable accommodations. Students must communicate those needs via self-advocacy to faculty as well as our office. And we'll talk a little bit later about how to register with our office, and how to start having those conversations about identifying yourself with a professor to let them know that you have a disability. Some other differences outlined here in this chart would be things like parent involvement. As Jody mentioned earlier, and definitely a focus of our conversation today would be, we do expect the student to be at the center of conversation with our office or really with any other office here on campus so that we can help them directly. Scheduling is very different. Many classes only meet a couple times a week or sometimes even just one day a week. So students may have to be a little more planful and mindful in order to plan ahead to ask for those accommodations in their courses. Extra help at the high school level typically comes from a classroom teacher or sometimes a special education teacher. And here at the college level, there would be things like office hours, tutors, or other different types of support staff meetings to help with that. And finally, due dates. Due dates here at the college level, most professors are just going to provide a syllabus at the beginning of the semester that will outline all the due dates for that student, but they're probably not going to remind them as often that they need to, that something's coming up like a test or a quiz or something like that. Heading into the next slide here, there's a few things I mentioned on the previous page that might be new or unfamiliar terms for you all, and so I just wanted to take a little bit of time to explain that. One would be the term that's fundamental alteration. That's something I mentioned a little bit on the previous page. So a fundamental alteration is a change to a course curriculum or a course of study that would significantly alter the required objectives or content of the curriculum. So I know that sounds very wordy. Really what that has to do with is what I mentioned before about modifications. So a modification would be something that would mean that we were asking a professor to change their course curriculum to fit the student's needs. And that's something that we're unable to do at the college level because each student is held to the same technical standards or essential requirements, which is that next bullet point there. Technical standards or essential requirements are outcomes that all students must demonstrate with or without the use of accommodations. And that can really vary. It's important to know that essential requirements come from many different levels. Some are set by the faculty and the institution itself. And that includes things like assignments or skills or course or program outcomes. But other essential requirements or technical requirements are actually set by accreditation boards or by the industry. So when we think about, the School of Engineering or the School of Nursing, there are certain state requirements that those programs must meet in order for students to be considered someone who's graduated with that degree. So that's why it's more complicated or more difficult at the college level for us to be asking for alterations to those things, because it would mean that we were trying to make an alteration at the state or accreditation board level. Next term would be reasonable accommodations or access. Reasonable accommodations are really in order to level the playing field in an academic setting. They are not driven by success. So, when we're looking at and having a conversation with a student about accommodations that may work for you, certainly we want that student to feel as though they can access the material, but the goal from our office is not to guarantee that someone gets an A in their courses. It's really the opportunity to show mastery through access, but not modifications of those materials. And finally, FERPA. FERPA is something that you're probably going to hear a lot about, as you continue into your college career here. And really that has to do with accessing educational records. So things like grades, schedules, financial records, those types of things. If a parent or guardian wanted access to those materials independently, they would need to sign a release. The student would need to sign a release through the Solution Center. That's not something our office would be able to share with a parent or guardian. In terms of information through our office, typically it's to obtain documentation. So for a student who may sign a FERPA release, it's usually with a medical provider if they felt we needed to reach out to that provider to gain more information, especially if it's a disability that fluctuates over time. It might be important for us to have that information. The student is always going to be in the conversation and aware of all content of the conversation. And we do request that students communicate directly with family members or guardians. We never want to be in a situation where, we're having one conversation with a parent or guardian and something entirely different with a student. We really do want to work directly with students. And so that's why that the access to information is a little bit different here at the college level than it would be perhaps at the high school level. And I'm going to turn it over to Jody.
Okay, so just a little bit more on what Lauren was talking about regarding access versus modification. So access, the examples to access would be ensuring that somebody in a wheelchair has access to campus events via elevators, ramps, that they can access everything. That captions like we're doing now and other accessible course material that helps a student access everything that they need to. Modification is an alteration to the expectations of a course or a major. So some of you might have had in the past something like, if the assignment has 50 questions or the test has 50 questions, the student only has to do 25, or they only have to do the critical questions, or the student can choose to do a paper over a presentation, or they can do a paper with a reduced page count. So, those are some of the things that what we're needing to do with students is the accommodations help them access the curriculum, not modify the curriculum. So we want students to do the exact same things as their peers in the college environment. We just want to add in tools to help them access everything that they need. Now we're going to kind of switch and begin the process of registering with our office. But first, the intake meeting and meetings beyond, we have an office policy that it's only going to be the student in these meetings. And a lot of people want to know why. So we're going to help you understand why right from the get-go. So this helps reduce disability stigma. This helps the student self-identify as the person who wants to have this conversation and wants to figure out what accommodations make sense. This really is their first opportunity in a lot of ways to do the self-advocacy and develop their own voice. And this is the beginning of the rest of their lives needing to do that. We also need to develop the relationship and the alliance with the student for support. We want them to connect with our office and feel connected to us throughout the rest of their time here. So it's important that, it feels that it's a one-to-one relationship. We do really need to consider what accommodations are relevant. Oftentimes, students will come with their IEP from high school, which has a very long list of things under the accommodation list, which aren't either relevant in the college setting or don't translate perfectly in the college setting, or the student says, that's been on there since third grade, but I haven't utilized it. And we really need to be able to have the opportunity to have that conversation. We also want students to learn ahead of time their own strengths and challenges and then have that conversation with us as we understand what they're going to face in the college environment. But we want them to have that conversation where they can unlock their strengths and their challenges in the college environment. We also want to really help working on removing learned helplessness. So students who kind of step back and let other people call all the shots for them. And we want to support success. It's in the end, it's the student's name on the degree and it's the student's own education, and their choices are what is going to kind of lead to their future. So let's get going with registering with the Disability Services Office.
So in terms of registering with our office, it is a pretty easy 3 to 4 step process that we have here. And we do have some links that we're going to be putting in the chat. They are included in the slides that we sent out, but in case you want to have them open on your browser, you certainly can. The first step is that the student fills out the public accommodation request form, or what's known as the PARF in our office, and uploads appropriate documentation to that form. I usually tell students, the opportunity really starts for you to let us know who you are on that form. The PARF is a great way for students to tell me how they're feeling, what strengths they feel they have, what challenges they anticipate they may have in the future. So that before I meet with the student, I'm able to see that and really think about, okay, well, what direction would we want this conversation to go in? Or, maybe a student mentions something and I think of an app or, a program here that would be really beneficial. So we really do want the student to fill that out. Otherwise, I know sometimes parents or guardians want to fill that out for the student. What oftentimes happens is then when I pull up that form and someone else has filled it out and I ask the student questions about it during the meeting, they have no idea what I'm talking about. So it's really good if that comes from the student. The second step would be on our office. So we then get a notification in our system, and once a week we get together as a team to review the documentation that we have in front of us together. And really we do that to figure out, is there a student who would be a best fit for someone in order to make sure that their intake meeting goes as smoothly as possible. So that's really why we're taking those steps. And so what happens is that if a student's public accommodation request form and documentation is approved during that meeting that we have together, there will be an email sent to the student's UMass Lowell email where they'll be able to take the next steps to schedule an intake meeting with our office. So they'll be able to log in and do that right using our software. Step 3 is having the intake meeting with one of us. So once that meeting is scheduled, they'll get notifications again in their UML email, reminders of the date, of the time, of all those things. And during that meeting, it's really a chance for us to get to know each other. So it's a chance for the student to be able to ask me questions or things that they might anticipate, as well as a chance for me to be able to get to know that student so that we can determine together what accommodations would be a good starting point for them so that they're ready to go. During that meeting, we do review what's called a student resource guide. It's typically sent to the student ahead of time so that the student's able to kind of look at that material and anticipate what we're going to talk about. But the student resource guide is also really great because if a parent or guardian had questions about what we discussed during the meeting, the student would be able to go over the student resource guide with that person as well. And then the last thing, as step 4, is more of an ongoing step. At the start of each semester, the student's going to log into the Accommodate software, and they're going to submit a semester request so that their accommodation letters get sent to their faculty. And then we do ask that the student and professor have a follow-up conversation with each other about what those accommodations might look like, because they may look slightly different in different classes. And it's important for the student and the faculty member to be on the same page about what those accommodations will look like in their course. So there's a few things that we can do to kind of prepare for the registration process. And you can see on the left-hand side of the screen there, parents and guardians and students should spend some time together reviewing some things before we kind of get to that registration process. And really, as Jody mentioned before, this is really the opportunity to help the student feel independent in moving forward so that they're confident in going into that meeting with our office. So the first thing would just be getting familiar with our website and the overall process that we have and those expectations. And that's available just, on the main page of our website. Also reviewing the documentation requirements. We have 7 different ways that someone can, give us documentation to establish the fact that they have a disability. We don't need all 7. We just need one. So just finding the one that fits the student's situation the best, and then helping them obtain that documentation so that they can upload it and we can review it and get the process started. It's also important to review that completed documentation with the student so that they understand their own strengths and challenges. Jody and I have both come from a K-12 world at some points in our lives, with her in social work and myself as a school psychologist. I definitely find that sometimes students are brought into those meetings and know everything about the paperwork, and other times they weren't really brought in at all. It's important for the student to be able to kind of drive the car in this meeting and to know what some of their own strengths and challenges might be. And so going over that documentation can be helpful. It can also be helpful to practice talking to others about what some of the strengths or challenges or barriers that you anticipate may come as they make this transition to the university level. When the student is filling out that public accommodation request form, certainly a parent or guardian can be available for questions and clarification. But again, it is good for the student to actually fill it out and put it in their own words in terms of how they feel moving forward. Working together to ensure that the student has access to and is regularly checking their UMass Lowell student email. I know email is not the preferred method of communication for a lot of students coming in now, but that is still the primary way that our office and many other offices are going to communicate with students. So it's important that they're able to log in and they're looking at that regularly so that they're up to date on a lot of important things that are coming up. And finally, it can be really helpful to sit down with the student and prepare a list of questions or concerns that they may have for the intake meeting. And what I would say too is that, I know that we're addressing a lot of things in terms of a parent or guardian. These are activities that a student can also go through independently. So if it's a student who maybe, their parent or guardian is really busy moving into the summer, those are things that a student can also do just to help themselves prepare and be a little bit more, confident going into that intake meeting.
Speaking of preparing for the intake meeting, here are some suggestions that we have, no matter where you end up. Hopefully it's here at UMass Lowell, but these are some conversations you can have no matter what you decide to do. So what challenges are you currently facing or have typically experienced in an academic setting? So think about when you're taking exams or quizzes. Think about when you're studying at home. Think about when you're in the classroom. Sort of what are some of those challenges? And so we can begin to have a conversation of how those will look in the college environment. What strengths do you have in the academic environment? This is just as important to know as what limitations or difficulties that you have. Knowing what accommodations have actually worked for you in the past, and what accommodations you think you might need for here in college. So I was actually at the welcome day on Saturday, and a lot of people were sharing with me that they're no longer on an IEP or a 504. Maybe they stopped a couple of years ago, and what do we need to do here? And actually, a transition time and a time where the rigor picks up in college and all kinds of expectations are different may bring up things from the past. So the last couple of years, a student may have been able to do okay, but it's really looking at what do you want to be ready for in a time of transition. So as long as it's something that you've really had within the past 5 years, or that you can really validate that you may have had even older than that, but that is really necessary, we can have a conversation about those. And just in general, is there anything else that you want us to know that's related to registering with us? So, maybe you really put one category of diagnosis in, but there's some other stuff going on that we might need to know about. So that's some stuff to think about. Other things to just think about in general, and there's a lot on this page, but just thinking ahead about the semester. So this is something you can do over the summer. So looking at the academic calendar and looking at the important dates and just kind of seeing how the flow of the semester will go. Thinking about what kind of planner will work best. You may work well with the type of planner you had in high school. Maybe you want to use a digital calendar or your phone. Even beginning to put in important dates, from the academic calendar ahead of time. And then when you get a syllabus for each class, kind of going through and figuring out which planner you're going to use so that you can start to input those dates. You might want to think about some apps that might do well for time management and organization. There's a lot out there, so even trying out some of them ahead of time could be helpful. Some of the products that we use are Blackboard, we use SIS for registration, and we use Outlook and OneDrive. And I know a lot of high schools are Google software people, and I feel you. I'm a Google person myself. So getting familiar with some of these products and will help the transition in September. Another thing to know about being registered with Disability Services is you have the opportunity to take a reduced course load, which is less than 12 credits, and you wouldn't be able to lose out on certain things that say 12 credits are necessary. So that would be living on campus, that would be getting onto Dean's List or being in the honors program. So for some students, really juggling just 2 or 3 balls is something that they can really succeed in and do well, but if they gave them 5 balls to juggle, it's going to be kind of difficult. So it really doesn't take away from how your capacity to do well in a class is, but it just takes away maybe how stretched thin you are. Maybe you have to attend to your medical needs and you really don't have the ability to do 5 classes because you're taking care of yourself in some other ways or mental health needs. So thinking about that, it is important that you talk with the Solution Center and make sure that that is something financially that you can swing, and we don't ever want to promise that. You can also talk ahead about how you might talk with your faculty about your accommodations and what information you're comfortable sharing, kind of finding that sweet spot of not oversharing. Your accommodation letters will not share what category of disability you have or what your diagnosis you have. It won't share anything about your symptoms necessarily. It will really just show what accommodations you're entitled to. So you can determine if there is something important that you do want to reveal about yourself and think about that and practice that. You can think about what you might say if you're sick or you miss a deadline or you're unprepared. And just in general, what your preferred communication style is, and also kind of understanding what the faculty member's communication style is. So you might like to email because it's easier, but they might want to talk in person. So really trying to figure that out and being comfortable with the various options. Also, just kind of knowing who your people are on campus. So thinking about instructors, how you will contact them, contacting them directly for needs, coming to us for needs. The class office, which you'll learn a lot more about, they're our partners, and they have tutoring, they have success coaching, they have advising, they have a testing center, they have a writing center, so they have a ton of supports for students, so they're really our partners. The counseling center and the health center, those are also our partners, and other supports that you might already be connected to, athletics, honors program, learning communities, Riverhawk Scholars. So know who your people are and really kind of think that through about who are your go-to people. All right, Lauren's up.
That's all right. Just a few more areas to consider. I think one thing would be making goals for the semester. So thinking about ahead of time, what are some other larger things aside from classes and, doing well in those? What are some other goals that a student may have? Is it to join a club? Is it to go on an outdoor adventure? Get a job? Other social opportunities that are here on campus. I think it's important to talk and to think about a reasonable amount of time to commit to those activities, and also how do you pull back if needed. I remember I was working with a student last summer, and we were going over their Google Calendar of when they could get some homework done and things like that. And what was coming up for the student, they kept telling me, well, I don't really have time. I don't have time. And I was looking at their calendar, and it was very busy, but it was busy with a lot of kind of voluntary things with clubs. And as much as clubs are important, and I don't want to say, I'm not trying to say I'm discouraging anyone, it is important to realize, though, how much of a time commitment those things can be, especially if you're on like the advisory board for that club, like you're a president or a vice president or a treasurer or a secretary. So thinking about the level of commitment that you want to have to those, what's reasonable so that you're still able to get homework done and then also have time to relax too. The other thing to think about is therapy, or other medical appointments or medications. This is a question that comes up for a lot of students, and I think it's important to think about it ahead of time. So if you have something where you would need to make regularly scheduled appointments, how are those appointments going to be scheduled? Who's going to do that? When are those going to occur? And then also, how are refills for any important medications going to be handled? Where will medication be stored? It's important to think about some substances that may be brought on campus would be a controlled substance. And so is there a need for a lockbox in order to keep those prescriptions safe and in the hands of the people that actually need them? And then also, how are you going to remember to or plan to take medications? Should there be a reminder in the student's phone? Should they have, something on their calendar app, something like that? As those things transition from a parent or guardian to a student, I think it's important to think about the effort sometimes that's being put into those things, and how can we make sure that the student is being successful and accessing the things that they need regularly. Another thing that comes up a lot is, just as kind of we're wrapping up here, is what to start. So really looking at what are we starting now, what can be done in order to make this process as smooth as possible. So just a review of kind of some of the things we talked about earlier. So, certainly together, reviewing documentation requirements on our website. We did post that in the chat as well for you to take a look at. Pick the one that works best for the student and help them obtain a copy. Having the student fill out the public accommodation request form and upload that completed documentation. Having the student check their UML email address for next steps. Having the student schedule their intake meeting when they're contacted by our office, which will again come through their UML email. This meeting really should take place over the summer. I know a lot of people ask, well, what about like the first week of classes? The first week of classes, students are going to be really busy figuring out what works for them, what doesn't work. Maybe they want to change some courses around. They're trying to get to know roommates, maybe join a club or an activity. There's a lot going on. We really do prefer that students meet with us over the summer to have that conversation so that accommodations can be in place on day one. They can go in, they can request that their letters get sent to their faculty, and they're ready to go for any, test or quiz or anything that may come up right away in the semester. So we really do heavily encourage people to have their intake meetings over the summer. And then finally, together, consider points of discussion for that intake meeting, and that was discussed on a previous slide.
And actually, actually, I'm just going back for one sec. So we're just to share a few things that I did put in the chat. The intake meeting sessions are going to open up as of June 1st, and students can self-select whether they want to come in person or virtually. We want to be available to, all needs of students. So it makes it easy to have that intake over the summer. Just a couple of things that I do want people to know also that, starting the process doesn't get students to have accommodations. So sometimes we'll hear from students, I thought I did everything I was supposed to do. I gave my documentation to admissions or something like that. What the steps are that we outlined today are the steps that get you all the way there, and each semester requesting that your letter go out to your faculty. So it's sort of like a toolbox. You have, yeah?
And that admissions doesn't share that documentation with us.
They
We
don't.
have it.
Yeah, no other department is going to get documentation over to us. It has to come directly to us. It can be uploaded online or emailed or faxed, sent, walked in. But accommodations in college are kind of like a toolbox. You're there, you have one in your house. Sometimes you need your screwdriver, sometimes you need your hammer, sometimes you need the screwdriver and the wrench. They're there. So they're there for you, but you do have to let an instructor know that you have a toolbox each semester, and those get emailed out to each semester. Some people want to know what happens if I'm not ready to register right away, or I forgot to request for my letters each semester. You can register with the Disability Services Office all the way up to, graduating senior semester, or you can request your accommodation letters anytime throughout the semester. You just have to understand that it starts from that point forward, so nothing can kind of be assisted retroactively for you, which is why we really encourage everybody to get this done early and get those letters out each semester early, even if you don't utilize accommodations until later on. So we're going to wrap up here and then leave room for questions. Either people can kind of shout out or people can put questions in the chat, but, just leaving with you with a nice quote. There are only two lasting things we can hope to give our children. One is the roots, and the other is wings. So you've done the roots. Now it's time for them to get the wings. These are just some of the websites that we referred to, including that letter from Jane Jarrow. And thank you. We hope to hear from you soon. I'm going to unscreen share and give people a chance to ask questions or to chat. Said thank you. Yeah, feel free to hop in some questions or open up. Hi.
Hi, I have a question. What is the percentage of students that graduate from UMass Lowell that have disabilities coming in?
You know what? That is a good question. I can tell you some different percentages. I can't tell you that percentage, but maybe I can give you context percentages.
All right.
So we have, as of today, we have 891 students registered with our office. I asked our administrative assistant today. And I was actually presenting with some faculty earlier and let them know that cumulatively, GPA-wise, our students have 95% of them are in good standing with the institution cumulatively, which really kind of speaks to the persistence that students have, and that students, if you're in good standing, you're likely to get to graduation, is sort of the idea. So I don't actually have our full retention to graduation percentage, but our students really do thrive and persist, and I'm always sharing that with faculty because I think that's really important.
Okay.
I can share with you some categories of disabilities too. I mean, students are across all categories. Our number one we ask students to self-identify with the category, and they can elect a number of categories. The number one that comes up right now is ADD, ADHD at 29% of our registered students. A close second is actually, I think it's 24%, is students who identify as having psychological disabilities, mental health conditions that are chronic and persistent. And then learning disabilities is right on the heels, which is interesting because that used to be our number one category that students were registered, and that's around 23%. And then we have other students that have more specific needs. We have neurodiverse students. I think that's about 15% identify as neurodiverse on the autism spectrum. And we have students that have needs for physical access with visual and hearing needs as well.
And I would say a lot of students overlap with those needs. So, our percentages don't ever reach 100%. They're usually over because students will identify in many different categories. Does anyone else have any other questions about any material that we presented today or anything about the registration process that we can clarify?
I see Dennis. Hi, Dennis. Oh,
Oh,
you
yeah.
too. Hello.
Hi. I had a question for you regarding, thank you, by the way, for the presentation. That was really helpful. Um, when you were talking about a reduced course load and for a student who may end up taking 9 credits or so, did you say that that would not affect their eligibility for housing, or would they not be able to live on campus?
Housing is one of the ones that it does not impact. So typically, housing says you need to have a full course load at 12 credits, but
Right.
if a student is registered with us, it would not impact their ability to stay in housing. So other places I've worked actually have like a once in a while under 12 credits staying in housing kind of situation, but ours across the board is something that students can elect to, to have. So some students just do really well with that reduced course load, and maybe they catch some summer classes, or if they can financially swing it, plan to take an extra semester or so. And that actually is just better to take it a little bit slower. Like I said, got to check with the financial aid area
Yeah.
on things, but we know that it won't impact a student's ability to be in housing, the honors program, or to be on dean's list. So, assuming that they can perform well in those smaller amount of classes, we want them to have the recognition that they deserve.
No, that's good information to know. Thank you for that.
Yeah, definitely check with Solution Center about any restrictions that student's personal account may have, where they may not be able to take a reduced course load. But I'm always saying to students, I'd rather you take it slow and do well rather than plow through and have to retake classes.
Because that's certainly going to slow you down in a
that's
different
gonna
way.
It's like, oh, isn't that gonna make it take forever for me to graduate? And I'm like, well, if you don't do well, that'll make you, So we want them to take it slow, ease in, meet some friends, like get to know the area. That's what's important. I think if a student is connected, they're going to thrive here. So we want to make sure they're not overwhelmed right away.
Great. Thank you.
Thanks. Were we just that thorough? It's possible we were.
I mean, we are great, So
I do have one more question. You said that would you be posting, or are you going to email to us a copy of the slides?
You've got them right now in the chat. Take them now. Yeah, we can
Okay.
also get them over to the orientation folks for the that are running Destination UML these events. But
Okay.
if you look up in the slides a little bit, unless you were a little bit late, but
No, I was here, and actually,
Yeah.
I'll be honest with you. I took photos with my phone, so I do have.
That's okay. You don't. We didn't. We are recording it, so you don't even need an accommodation for recording or taking photos.
Okay.
There.
All right, great. Thank you.
I have one more question. This is, I guess, kind of a general question. I don't know if it applies just to UMass, but when accepting students with disabilities, because they have to self-identify, often, because of all the modifications that happen in high school, grades may be somewhat, what an A may be is different for a kid that's not on an IEP versus a kid on an IEP. Like, how do you determine if UMass Lowell is going to be right for that child when there's stuff that goes on behind the scenes that you're just not aware of at this point in time?
We cannot speak to that, unfortunately. That is all coming from the admissions side. So they have a process, and they work through, working with their schools that they identify, and kind of understanding who is a candidate. We don't work with students until until they have deposited. So they've already been admitted and they've deposited.
Yeah.
And they're coming here. So unfortunately, I don't know if I can speak to that. Can you speak to that?
No, I mean, what I typically recommend to students is to, either do a virtual tour or, come here in person for a tour. You don't know until you try. There's no way
Right.
to know that someone is a perfect fit for a school. So the best bet would be, do they have the academic program that student wants? Is this an environment that will work for them? We are a large, decentralized, urban campus. For some students that's a great fit. For others, it's overwhelming for them, So I think it's really taking the time to do those tours either virtually or here or in person. And also looking at what academic programs are provided so that, it can be a best guess in terms of a fit.
Catherine had a great question in the chat. Will all professors or offices be able to see that a student is a disabled student? No.
No.
And actually, even if a student is registered with our office, only when they give their intent to get their letters over to their instructors will that instructor ever know that they are registered with us. So students can each semester have that letter go to all their instructors, or they have the opportunity to review the letter ahead of time and actually say, this is a drawing class and I only need accommodations for testing, and so I'm not even going to send this letter to that instructor. And they can. We would advise them to send it to everybody because you never really know, but and you don't have to utilize all accommodations even if you send it to them, but students can self-elect that. And no, offices do not know. Almost no offices outside of here know unless a student self-identifies with them. We do have a process for a student to self-elect to let their academic advisor know through our office, but we will not let their academic advisors know unless the students say, yes, I would like my academic advisor to know that I'm registered with your office. But other than that, that's just a yes/no question. It's not even what accommodations that student has or what disability that student has.
Yeah. And the letters do not identify what disability a student has. I often joke with students, you're not going to walk out of my office with a tattoo on your forehead that says that you have a disability. So, it's really up to the student to decide, who to share that with, whether it's through the letter, through their academic accommodations letter, or whether, they have a conversation with someone during office hours privately about some specific needs they may have.
Thanks, Catherine.
Any other questions about the process or anything else that we presented today? I did put the slides back in the chat in case there were folks who came in late. There is a SharePoint for the slides that we have up, and there's also a separate link for accessible slides that are screen reader accessible.
And those slides, other forms that we put up, if you go right to our website, one thing I would highly suggest is that you take a minute and fill out our interest form, even if you decide not to come here. We'll have an opportunity to scan, and if you decide to come here and you've deposited, we'll actually reach out to you, so you can kind of forget about us, and we'll reach out to you if you've deposited and kind of get the ball rolling and encourage you to get this going over the summertime. We just ask that we have a month to finish up with our current students and get them through the finals hump, and then we switch right over and start getting everybody going that's coming here. It's nice to have a meeting with us over the summer before you start meeting everybody, because it's just nice to know somebody already when you get started here, and to have some familiar faces, but also just to have something checked off the list. Additionally, we know that students will come for orientation, and we do encourage them not to come meet with us during orientation. The schedule is from sun up to sundown, and it's super busy, and students don't bring their best selves. They're very exhausted, even if they try to come after or fit it in. So the virtual meetings that we have make it possible for a student to meet with us even if they're not local. And also, some people may consider sticking around a business day on either end of the orientation, and then you could come in and meet with us. But we do want to be really flexible with students and not take away from the orientation, because honestly, that is where you get acclimated and you get to meet other people and be social, and we don't want to take from that. All right. Well, we won't keep people. We'll just stay on for a minute, and we hope that you have a wonderful day, and we hope to see you here soon.
Thanks for coming.
Thank you. if you're sticking around for any questions, you're welcome to ask. If not, we'll say thank you. Have a nice day.